Hello, everyone. Hello, 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 hello. I hate to break up like engaging conversations, but I'm gonna get us started here this afternoon. This morning, still morning, still morning. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I am Debbie Willis. I'm an assistant vice provost in the provost office in the unit Access and Opportunity. And earlier, Vice Provost Dillard shared the strategic vision for Access and Opportunity. And I'm just so fortunate to work alongside her and our team to bring that vision to life. When we talk about access, we aren't just talking about ramps or captions, though those are vital and necessary, but we're talking about the removal of hidden and sometimes quite obvious barriers that still stand in the way of true equity. We know that for some of you, students, staff, and faculty, Michigan has not always felt like a place where you belong, where you can not only survive, but thrive. We recognize that there is a silent struggle in navigating systems, buildings, and social norms that simply were not designed with the neurodiversity in mind. I know this because even before Access and Opportunity was a formal unit, I had the privilege and honor of working with many in the disability community and allies and advocates, with many of you in this room. And you have been very clear that meeting the legal minimum is not enough. And we agree. So what does access and opportunity look like for those navigating neurodiversity? Well, to start, it looks like this conference. I clearly remember when it was just an idea forming, and now you're in the third year. So kudos to all of you for your persistence and hard work. I've attended each year, and I've learned so much at these conferences. Last year, I was sitting at a table with another speaker, and he was so moved by the speaker before him that he was in tears. He talked to us about his conversation and struggled with conversation with his son. When he got up to speak, he thanked the speaker that was before him and said that he felt much more prepared to communicate with his son after this. His son was diagnosed as autistic. He shared his story with us at the table, and there wasn't a dry eye at our table. Later that week, a graduate student came to my office, and she was very discouraged because her child had the recent diagnosis of autism. And she felt very discouraged and had a difficulty navigating the system and the diagnoses. I was able to share with her some of the resources from this conference and the link to the conference, and she left feeling a lot more encouraged. So the work that goes on here is far more reaching than the people in this room. And we want to make sure that we provide resources for you to continue to do this important work. Access and opportunity looks like partnership. It looks like working with and really listening to and alongside the advocates like the Council for Disability Concerns, CFDC. Hi, Pam. The Disability Justice Network, the DC at UM, and all the folks tabling today, and every person in this room who's really working toward a sense of belonging and thriving. We see your efforts and we appreciate you, and we're committed to continuing the collaboration. Access and opportunity looks like the Provost Office and A&O leaning into the long-term systemic work of closing the gap between who we are now and the inclusive university we strive to be. It looks like intentionally incorporating neurodiverse concerns in spaces like the Provost Advisory Committee on Disability Affairs and ensuring that neurodiversity scholars and advocates are applying for and engaged in the Disability Scholarship Initiative. One of our primary goals at ANO is to partner with you to shift the burden from the individual onto the institution. We want to acknowledge and celebrate our successes. And yes, we've had some successes, but we also must acknowledge that progress while continuing the hard work of addressing where we can do better. Both things are important, and I'm here for all of it. Our next speaker is a phenomenal example of establishing partnerships to address access, opportunity, and a sense of belonging for the neurodivergent. It is my pleasure to introduce Jesse Sanchez. Jesse is someone who has been in the trenches of advocacy work for decades. Jesse began his involvement with Eye to Eye in 2010 as a student at UC Berkeley, where he founded and led a chapter of the organization's flagship mentoring program. His experiences supporting younger neurodivergent students while navigating ADHD and learning differences himself shaped his longstanding commitment to neurodiversity advocacy. After graduation, Jesse remained deeply engaged in leadership roles, including founding the alumni board and serving on the board of directors. In 2024, he returned full-time to lead the Neurodiversity Alliance and was appointed president in 2025. He brings personal insight, strategic leadership, and a steadfast belief in the brilliance of every neurodivergent individual to this work. Please join me in welcoming Jesse Sanchez.
Thank you. Good morning, beautiful minds. Just as a quick sense of the audience here, any fellow ADHDers in the audience in the house? Amazing. Can we get some snaps for our ADHDs, spicy flavored folks? Any folks who identify on the spectrum? Any autists? Yes. Oh, these are my people. Amazing. Any parent advocates? Yeah. Oh, I'm just so happy to be in community with you all. You know, I'm so excited about the theme for this year's conference around elevating neurodivergent voices and supporting mental health, well-being, and belonging. And so my aim today, if you'll indulge me, is just to share my own journey and my own story with you today. And this maybe will be a bit of a primer for later in the day, where we have our students come and we elevate their voices and we listen to their stories. And one of the great benefits that I have is, I always like to say that my most proud role and title here at the Neurodiversity Alliance is that of an alumni. It was community, and specifically this organization, that really transformed me personally, helped me solidify my own understanding of what it means to be neurodivergent. It also, in doing so, shifted me from identifying as someone who wondered if I was actually just like a defective toy from the toy store. And it shifted me to realizing, no, actually, I have great gifts, not despite being neurodivergent, but because of it. And it shifted me in a moment when I was a college student from really isolating, being alone, struggling with anxiety, depression, to realizing that I was not alone. I was part of this incredibly sparkly, quirky community that shared a ton of pride and a deep, almost nervous system level connection. So I'm so excited to bring you on that journey today. Hopefully, it will bring you not just to the experience of what it's like to be a student navigating the world neurodivergent, but the whole pathway of what happens afterwards, after we leave post-secondary education. And for many of us, neurodiversity, it's an intergenerational experience, right? I see the heads nodding. One of my good friends says, we have a number of supporters of our organization, and they end up getting identified or diagnosed with their neurotype through their child's identification, right? And so I want to share with you all, I love it, yeah. And that's actually been increasingly part of my own journey. And so I'll start from the beginning, my own neurodivergent lineage story, and we'll end actually with my current journey as a parent advocate. And so we'll talk about what it's been like for me, really finding my space and where I belong, and really not just physically, but internally, in community, in schools, being someone who's always been outside the box. And that story, it actually starts, we'll start at the beginning. So you see this photo here. This is me, little Jesus, Jesse, with me and my mom. There we go. That's me. Okay. Thank you for the audience participation. I'll probably need more of that. So this is me and my mom when I was a little toddler, visiting my family in Mexico, where my father's from. And this looks like a very happy, innocent photo. But the reality is, we all have a unique origin story, and this is mine. And what you can't see in this photo is actually a really perilous and dangerous period of life for this young woman and her small child. See, my mother, who I stand up here really on her shoulders, I'm also a very emotional leader, so you'll excuse me if I start getting emotional a little bit when I talk about some of these things. She has her own journey. She comes from a generation where there's a lot less awareness and diagnosis and accessibility of neurodiversity, of her ADHD and her learning differences, and her families. Our family was very impacted by mental health challenges. My mother ended up running away from home, an abusive household, when she was 9 years old, really to survive. And as she made her way through the world, she ended up really struggling with addiction. And that's where she met my father. And my father was, at the time, he was a formerly incarcerated person, and he was a drug cartel leader. And during this stage of our life, it was a period where my mother was grappling with addiction. We were in very unstable, really dangerous environments. And her being the true hero's journey and heroine in this story, after multiple attempts, was able to really escape that world of organized crime, which was not easy and not safe. But our origin story was one, with a lot of instability, not knowing where we belonged, actually being kind of semi-estranged from really a lot of our extended family. At times living in cars, cheap motels, and through the grace of God, when I was 4 years old, she got sober, and she got sober through an incredible program. So many people grow up in their family traditions, maybe going to a church or going to synagogue or temple. When I was growing up, I would go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. I'd be like 4-year-old, 5-year-old kid sitting in the corner of often a church basement near the folding table with the coffee and the donuts and my coloring page, listening to a room of adults sitting around a table, really folks whose lives were at a stage where they were unmanageable. Some of these people were court mandated to be in that room. But what I learned there was the power of community, the power of unmasking, and what people say in the 12-step program is the power of sharing your experience and your strength and your hope with someone else who is trying to get by the way that you are. And I think that I didn't realize it then, but that became a really formative, impactful experience for me. And it really helped me to understand the incredible transformative power of being in a healthy, authentic community. Moving forward, also, if I could get, Mike, if you could scroll down a little bit for me. I just want to see where I'm at. Oh, awesome, thank you. By the time I was in middle school, our life had begun to start to stabilize a little bit. I was growing up in Los Angeles, and when it was time for me to start to look around and find community, to find identity, belonging, and role models, I found a lot of people fell into a crowd in many ways of peers who had backgrounds like mine. And the older people that we looked up to, frankly, many of them were gang affiliated. They were engaged in, young adult substance abuse. And what I learned there was that, ultimately, these were folks that at that time in my life, they really gave us a sense of belonging. And there's truth that community is really powerful, even if it's not a healthy community. And so that set me on a really challenging trajectory. And around that time was the time that I was first, identified as having, ADHD and learning disabilities at my local public middle school. Now, from the time I was in kindergarten up until that moment, my report cards had always said the same thing. I was a, generally satisfactory, B, kind of bright, insatiably curious student. But the two reports were always, number one, assignments late missing, and number two, speaks out of turn in class. Some things actually haven't changed that much, to be honest. But in the 6th grade, after one of these report cards, my mom said, "Hey, I'm gonna come back in like 30 minutes and check on you to see how you're doing on this worksheet for homework." And as like a dutiful son, I said, "Great, sounds good, no problem." And so I sat down at my desk in my room, closed the door. I picked up my pencil, looked at the worksheet on my desk, and at some point, my eyes drifted towards the walls of my room. And so as a kind of 90s middle school kid in Southern California, my walls were covered in my pride and joy, all these like incredible surfing, skateboarding, motocross, right, adventure sports posters. And I saw how I was noticing how the different edges lined up and met, right, as I kind of curated my room. And after some period of time, after which I've no sense of how much time it was, I looked down and I said, "Oh, I need to be doing this worksheet." And so I brought my mind back to the worksheet. And at some point, my mind drifted off again. Maybe this time it was probably middle school girls. And then I caught myself, and I tried to bring myself back again. I don't know how much time went by, really, but my mom came back. She opened the door, and she went in to check in on me, and she said, "Jesse, how's it going?" And I looked up at her, and I said, "I can't get started." And I burst into tears, almost unexplainably. But we knew something was different around my learning style and how I moved through the world. And I was very fortunate to be at a public school in LA that did give me access to academic accommodations, and I really benefited from those things that a lot of students probably here at Michigan benefit from: extended time on exams in a distraction-reduced environment, note-taking support in the classroom, and it gave me structure, and it gave me access, and it gave me a chance to really shine and succeed academically and intellectually. And Mike, if you could just scroll down to my bullets in the last half here. Thank you. But one thing that I didn't have was really any understanding of what was going on, any understanding of my brain. It almost felt like there was something that was being hidden from me, swept under the rug, something that educators, teachers, my mom either didn't want to talk to me about or didn't know how to talk to me about, right? But one thing that I learned, I think, consciously or subconsciously through this process, is that I really started masking how I was showing up in all kinds of spaces, at school, with my friends, at home. So there was different versions of me. And it was all, I think, really drawing towards this deeper question of what's the version of me that's going to be accepted and that's okay. And I truly became like the ultimate chameleon. Now, this kind of proceeded all the way through high school. And I went to this very large high school, public high school in Los Angeles. It was 4,000 students. And in our high school graduation, it was held in the large horse race track in our community. And so they actually placed all the seats where the horses would really run down the finish line, right? I guess that's maybe symbolic. I didn't think about that till now. And all the parents and families would be up in the grandstands, right? Where all the, spectators would be, wagering on the horses. And while I was sitting there in my burgundy cap and gown, and I was looking at the stage and all the students who were crossing, I noticed there were some things different about some of the students. They had like swag and bling. It was their graduation regalia. It was their cords, it was their stoles, it was their medals, it was these accolades. And many of these students, frankly, were going off to incredible universities. And I thought to myself, what have I been doing? When I was in high school, I didn't know what a research university was. I didn't know the difference between like a state school and a community college. No one in my family had even graduated from high school. And because I was a student with an IEP, all of my peers, there was kind of an expectation for us. We did have the benefit of getting together and going on a field trip to the 2 local community colleges near our campus. Now, looking back at my academic performance, I likely was nearly eligible with a little pushing and guidance to go to a great university. But it's like no one really expected that of students who had IEPs at our public school. So I knew that I was going to land in my local community college. And in some ways, I was okay with that. I knew my friends who were going there. But I saw it as an opportunity to really restart. And I thought, when I get to community college, I think that's where I will, that's where I'm going to try to, as a master chameleon and masker, I'm going to consciously curate my community. I'm going to find all those overachieving kids from high school and community college and hang around them. So I joined student government, I joined the Honor Society, and I really reset. And I think that was really, really helpful for me. I found great meaning in student leadership in this critical period of student undergraduates' lives, where you're really starting to build your sense of identity, your resume, your sense of where you're going to go in the future. And I found some great peers and role models. For example, so this is actually a photo from my associated student body executive board peers in my local community college at Citrus. And at the time, we were doing a rally for a ballot proposition in California to make sure that California was fully funding its mandate to support public education, higher ed in California. Things really started to shift for me. I also started to see a different model of masculinity as a young man who was fatherless. I had peers like my friend Mike, who was an older reentry student. He was a veteran. He was super humble. He woke up at like 5 o'clock in the morning all by himself to go running, which I just thought was super suspicious. But it really made a huge difference for me. And ultimately, that helped me to transfer to my local land-grant research university in California, the University of California, Berkeley, which at the time was my dream school. And I had this interesting moment. My first semester at Cal, I was enormously excited, but I noticed something. See, I transferred I lived in the transfer student dorms. I actually had 2 roommates, one of whom had been my best friend from kindergarten in LA. But I couldn't help but notice for the first time, studying together with peers where we were living together, just how different I was, just how different my learning style was. You know, my best friend John would sit down and it was midterms time and he would kind of crank through and he'd finish his papers and he'd be studying and, you know, he was also a very gifted person and finish at the top of his curve. But I needed to get up. I needed to move around. I needed to change my environment. I needed novelty. I needed to manage my coffee and stimulant intake just right. But I had no understanding of why. And mind you, I had spent my entire middle school through community college experience having access to disability accommodations, having IEPs, but no sense of what that meant and why. And so I think as a result of that, I just started to question, frankly, my own competence, my own belonging, my own fit. I started to think, am I just a diversity admit? What am I doing here with these bright, brilliant students as someone who's learning so differently? And my only paradigm at the time was that I must be broken. There must be something wrong with me. And so I did this test. I figured if I really belong at this university, I should be able to do it the normal way. I should be able to do it just like my peers. What's with these academic accommodations from the Disability Resource Center at Berkeley? So my second semester as a transfer student, I made an intentional decision to distance myself from the Disability Resource Center. I said, I'm not going to use any accommodations. This is going to prove to myself that I belong, right? I should be able to do it like everybody else and on my own. And what happened that semester at Berkeley was my grades tanked. But worse than that, my anxiety spiked persistently throughout that semester, pushing into the summer where I was really kind of showing almost clinical depression signs. And my own sense of self-worth had plummeted. And I started to very much question what I even thought I should expect of myself after college. I thought I was a fraud. And so in that moment, this is actually a photo of me that summer. That summer, I got a fellowship through the Institute for Governmental Studies at UC Berkeley to live and work in the state capitol. At the time, I was interning for the state senator there. And this was a rally we were having. But I was sitting at my desk one afternoon, really unraveling, and sitting with all of this, anticipating the coming fall semester. And I received an email to my student email account. And it was an email from the Disability Programs and Service Office at Berkeley. And it was inviting students on the listserv to start a chapter of the ND Alliance at Berkeley and the mentoring program. And when I saw that, and I read the description of this program, it struck me so deeply in that moment of need. And I thought, when I was in community college, I loved tutoring and mentoring younger students in my community in LA. I loved student leadership. I only have a small amount of time left here at Cal. And frankly, I think I really need this. I need to explore, what is all this about, right? Having learning disabilities and ADHD. How does it apply to me? No one explained. And so I clicked yes. I picked up the phone and I had a conversation with actually my predecessor. It was the president of the ND Alliance at the time in New York City. He said, why do you want to bring a chapter of our program to UC Berkeley. And frankly, I just had someone to share my story with. And I told him about the semester prior. I told him about the confusion of my own brain. And he said, "You sound perfect." And I thought, "Are you sure you heard what I said?" And so he said, "There's one catch. We need you to fly to our Student Leadership Summit to get trained at Brown University. It's in a few weeks. We'll pay for everything. Don't worry about it. You'll stay in the dorms. You'll meet other students from around the country. Can you commit?" And as like a student from humble beginnings and never left my small corner of the country, I said, "That sounds great. Sign me up. Let's go." And that weekend completely transformed my life. This is a photo of one of our summits. That's me together with other students from around the country. I met students from all around the US, students on the spectrum, students with ADHD, various learning differences. The difference between them and me is it seemed like all of them knew it, right? More than that, they celebrated and owned their neurodivergence. And it blew my mind. And the more I had conversations with these folks, the more I saw such a salient part of myself that I didn't understand, that I felt had been hidden from me. It was this experience of self-knowing that only came through community and seeing it in others. And I think, so actually this is a photo from my journal that I had been working on, and I brought with me to the summit in 2010 that year. And this is me trying to literally sort myself out. Who am I? Where do I belong? This chameleon, right? Has my name in the middle, has all these different assets of my lived experience, right? Being an Angelino from Los Angeles, being of Mexican descent, being from a single parent household. And the first time I put on their learning disabilities. And I was sitting in, it wasn't just the incredible session content and the inspiring leaders who were at the summit. It was really the time between. It was the late nights sitting up with other students in the hallway, being able to share with them my messy journey of figuring out who I am and hearing from them what they thought about what it meant to have learning differences, to have autism, normalizing it. And it really helped me to start to piece together the puzzle pieces of my life and my identity. There's a huge connection to mental health and belonging. There's an incredible a longitudinal study from Harvard. I think it's the Harvard Adult Development Study, looking at men over the course of over 75 years now, looking at all kinds of factors and what are the things that most impact health span, lifespan, quality of life. And one of the number one things is quality of relationships, right, in community. And I was able to meet people who I could feel completely comfortable in my own skin around. Zero masking. I could start to celebrate and relate around the parts of my identity that frankly had been hidden in a source of shame. And I met astounding people. One of the men here holding that sign, we're still great friends today. At the time we met, he was a graduate student at Northwestern University, studying clinical psychology. He's has ADHD and dyslexia, and now he runs this astounding psychotherapy group, primarily of practitioners who are neurodivergent, serving clients who are neurodivergent around the country. And just the inspiration around what we're capable of as a community really became illuminated to me through this group. And there was other moments too. This is another page from my journal that weekend at that summit. We had a speaker. He was a very accomplished business leader at Intel. He had dyslexia and ADHD, and he got up in front of the group of student leaders and he said, "You guys are the elite, like you're the elite of the elite, like fighter squadron for the neurodiversity movement." He made everyone feel so special. He also demoed this incredible technology that he developed at Intel, where you could just pull it out of your pocket and you could look at various forms of text and it would transmit it into audio format for you. This was like, iPhone and AI had not come along as far as it has now at that time. And later at the end of the conference, we're sitting at this bar on Thayer Street near Brown University. And he was sitting there by himself, and I thought, what a great opportunity to talk to an impressive, accomplished neurodivergent professional who's farther along in their life. We sat together and admitted he'd had a few drinks. But he said a couple of things that really struck me. I quoted him here. I removed his name to save the innocent. But he said, I just told him about the shame, confusion, and brokenness that I was still working through. And he said, "You're not broken." And he had some choice words like, F them, right? Implying like whoever you're imagining is judging you, right? But really what it was, I think, was a more internalized ableism than anything else. And he said, you need to own it. He said, you need to come out with it. This is a little quirky, but he said, you need to come out with it and be proud of it like a gay man is. His words, not mine. But there was something insightful there for me because non-visible disability, being neurodivergent, non-visible disability can be a closeted experience if you choose for it to be. Being neurodivergent is something you can mask if you choose for it to be. And there's a toll to that. And so I came away from that weekend and I actually wrote some action steps for myself. What am I gonna do with all of this transformative experience? I need to take action. And I wrote down these steps. It was, number one, learn how to talk about my learning disability. So I think at this point, check that one off. But at the time, that took a lot of work for me. It was not easy. Learn how to tell people about our program and the NE Alliance, because this was not just a personal transformation program. It was a training program to go and make real change in my community on my campus. It was have a meeting with Abby from our disability service office. Ask her to explain my disability to me. Prod for understanding. What is visual cognition, that term that I thought I heard throughout K through 12 applied to me in my IEP meetings? How do you know when you have ADD officially? Having never been, sought like a clinical diagnosis outside of the education environment. And true to my 12-step upbringing in AA, meditate and pray. And there was a documentary that was recommended to me about neurodiversity at that summit. I was like, I need to watch that. And I said, email Connie. Connie Chiba was the head of our disability office at Berkeley, and she was going to be our chapter advisor to start our program there. I was like, inquire about schools in the Berkeley area where we can actually serve other students and they can be our mentees. Let's talk to them about how many students that we can serve. Let's get to action. Let's talk with Connie about how we can reach more students at Berkeley to invite them to be a part of this community and embrace their own neurodiversity on a very academically competitive and rigorous campus where learning disabilities were highly, highly stigmatized. Set a date. Set a date to start an event. Let's do our art room program and work backwards from that and set a date to have a mentor community event on campus. So that really transformed my Berkeley experience. I made friends for life. I transformed students' lives in our own community. There was so much neurodivergent healing and joy that was released that last year at Berkeley. And I went on to into my career, my life after the ND Alliance. This talk is not about ND in the workplace. So that's another keynote. But this is a photo of me during my time working at Google. I spent most of my time working at venture-backed startups. Most recently was working at LinkedIn. But there was a version in the workplace that I really experienced as well, around masking, around performance, around burnout, and around purpose. But that was one of the things that inspired me to create our alumni group, because neurodiversity does not stop. You don't stop being neurodivergent when you're a student. It will follow you into your career, and you need to know how to have a community and a network and ways of working to thrive in the world of work. So we'll end here. I told you that neurodivergence is an intergenerational experience and story. This is my son, Mateo. This is at our play care center near our home in New York. Mateo's a twin. He has a 3-year-old. He and his sister are 3 years old. And Mateo is on the spectrum. Now, Mateo has a family and is growing up in a culture where neurodiversity is celebrated. It's normalized, right? And his story is going to be so different than mine. I also I'm married to an educator. My wife is a 10-year special education teacher. And for us, differences are not something to hide. They're something that we honor in our house. And with me and Mateo, there's something really special as a neurodivergent dad and a neurodivergent son. It's almost uncanny, the way that he and I connect. It's not always verbal. It's not always structured, but it's very deeply felt. We're both sensory seeking. You can see my fidget up here. So satisfying. Thank you, Lydia. And we experience the world very intensely. Light, sound, vibration, emotion. Sometimes that intensity overwhelms us. Sometimes it's a little bit chaotic. And our house is not a quiet place. Part of that might just be from having a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old and an ADHD dad. But that itself becomes this intense bridge with me and Mateo oftentimes. We have this kind of shared rhythm, a shared language. Throughout the day, when Mateo needs to soothe, he comes to me specifically and he rests his chest on my chest. And in that moment, I get emotional, but we very much co-regulate together in that moment. And those moments, I don't have to explain to him, I don't have to explain to myself what we're experiencing. We just understand each other. And it feels like, I'm witnessing something that I didn't have to grow up with. In a way, it's kind of version of myself that fully belongs, just as he is. And so I think that's the biggest message here for our community. If you ever felt like you had to hide parts of who you are, this is to be accepted, like this is your invitation to come out of hiding. And it's in these circles, it's with this community that you don't have to explain. You can just connect and you can just be neurodivergent. And so that's my call to everyone today is, you don't defy the odds by becoming someone else. You defy them by becoming your full self. Thanks, everybody. All right, questions. I'm an overshare, so go ahead.
Hi, thank you for being here. I wanted to hear maybe a little bit more. I think it's such a common experience for students entering college, especially, coming from more impoverished backgrounds or maybe places where they didn't have that sort of support, to look at their accommodations in a way where maybe they don't feel worthy, maybe they don't feel like it's fair to other students, maybe they're not doing college, quote unquote, the right way. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to your experience with that, and then also talk about ways that institutions can support students so that they maybe don't have those concerns and we can alleviate some of that stress.
Thank you for that question. It's such a central part of my story and my experience. I think it was really helpful for me to be around other students who were neurodivergent and proud and used accommodations and could normalize that to others who weren't there yet, for one thing. I think culturally, the way the institution, the Disability Resource Center, faculty are trained to really embrace a neurodiversity paradigm, to be student-centered and focused, and to be generous with, giving students the support they need. I think that takes a certain amount of cultural transition and training from the institution. But I just personally, it was really helpful for me to understand the metaphor of, you don't give somebody a hard time for having to wear like reading glasses, right? In order to be able to demonstrate, to learn the way they need to learn and demonstrate what they've learned. And to understand that that's the same dynamic as needing extended time on an exam or a distraction-reduced environment or a sensory friendly environment. I think that metaphor helped me to internalize and be okay with pursuing and receiving accommodations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I also kind of just popped into my mind here really quickly. I wonder what you think about accommodations in general at university. I know that most commonly it is either extended time or it's a distraction-free environment. Is there more that you think that we could be doing?
I mean, really, in theory, the opportunities for accessible learning are like limitless and undefined, right? You can be creative. And I think one of the things that I've found is that accommodations are, or in Australian parlance, as we heard earlier today, adjustments, right? They're really idiosyncratic oftentimes to individuals. And I think there's almost a certain amount of kind of coaching and consulting and asking, what's the barrier for you here? How can we be creative? So I think that's one piece. I know that institutions are also focusing on how do they really focus on universal design for learning and how do they implement that across their instruction, their policies, their spaces. And that's another approach I think institutions can take kind of top down to make learning more accessible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jenny Herstein from the Office of University Development at University of Michigan. So I'm part of a volunteer committee at my department where we are trying to bring more awareness of neurodiversity and mental health to our office. And one of the things that really struck me about your presentation just now was the importance of community and community building. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how you build community in that way when there may be stigma for people about self-identifying, or maybe people are discovering their identities and aren't sure if they can identify a certain way. Maybe they don't have a formal diagnosis yet. And so how do you build space and community where people can feel that there are other staff out there like them, but without the pressure of having to identify a very particular way to access those spaces?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Stepping away from like the student model, obviously we have the identity-based affinity clubs with ND Alliance. Workplaces often have employee resource groups, right? Like ERGs, and I'm not sure what that looks like right now across the expansive University of Michigan, but I found that to be really powerful. One of the things I did at one of the technology companies I did was kind of recharter and revitalize the mental health and disability employee resource group. And that was really great. It had structure. We had an executive sponsor, someone who self-identified as a senior leader with that community, right? To give a certain amount of seniority and space and cover and resources. And then having those initial leaders, right? Who can come to a space, and this is similar to the model with our student club model. The ND Alliance is not a club model that is exclusive to folks who identify as neurodivergent. We're in some ways very inspired and modeled after the Gay Straight Alliance Network. It's about bringing allies, right, together with folks who identify. And in that space, people can be curious, right? And they can show up and they can say, this is where I'm at on my journey. I'm questioning. I'm an ally. I'm a very proud autist or ADHDer, right? But I think it takes that, like anything, it takes the initial leadership, right? And the commitment to create that space, someone to be the organizer. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
My name is Alicia Hens. I'm a career coach at the LSA Opportunity Hub. I had a question around just navigating disclosure as someone who's a job seeker, as well as like, have you ever requested accommodations on the job? Because when I meet with students during coaching appointments, it comes up, and I can totally understand like some of the apprehension around it. I feel like in this space, it's definitely one of those things that we talk about and we encourage, but like thinking beyond like college, like what that experience can truly look like, based on maybe different, sectors, of course, but just was wondering about those sort of things.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. It's a bit of a sticky wicket. It's not, I don't think there's any great universal advice when it comes to disclosing in the workplace or disclosing, for example, when applying. It's a bit of a personal choice. I think it depends a lot on the culture and the commitments of that employer. Look, if you're applying through Microsoft's neurodivergent hiring pipeline program, right? Like that's very different, right? Than if maybe you're applying to a program at like a very competitive, high finance institution on Wall Street where people, frankly, a lot of culturally, they really don't care, right? And so I think there's some choice that needs to go in. There's some discernment that needs to go into what are the employers that you're seeking? What are the available pathways and programs that exist? Because there are increasingly larger numbers of employer talent pipelines to organizations for neurodiverse talent. Once you're in there, it takes a lot of trust. It's really tough for young professionals because I'm taking my own journey. There's this element of like figuring out where you fit in the world of work. What do you want to do? How much is this experience, this challenge, friction that I may be experiencing in the workplace now that I'm in, how much is it as a result of really a lack of adjustments and reasonable adjustments and accommodations that can make me thrive? And also how much of this is just like not the right fit for me? And so I think those are all really important things that we need to think through for students is, how are you shaped in the workplace? What brings you energy? What's the lifestyle you want to be? What are your greatest aptitudes? It's a big equation there, but it's definitely a huge topic right now in corporate America. And so I think we're on the cusp of hopefully some progress. Yeah.
Hello. We're going to take one more question. Jesse will, of course, be at the table over there with the ND Alliance, so you'll be able to ask him questions later.
Hi. First of all, thanks for being here. Second, my question is not related to the workplace per se, but as a parent advocate who also found herself diagnosed after 2 children were diagnosed. Mm-hmm. So my oldest is going off to college and he's brilliant in so many ways, but I see myself in him in that he doesn't have to study, and I floundered my first 3 semesters on campus. Your story just resonated with me. I didn't study the same. So as an incoming freshman, what kind of resources would you recommend for someone so that they begin good habits from the beginning?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I think it's look, I'm not at the phase of parenting yet where I'm launching a student into college. Hopefully, eventually, I expect that. But thinking back to that experience, there's certainly, it's a period of time where young people are developing their agency, some level of agency and responsibility, and no doubt, caregivers, community institutions, in order to really support student success, should provide levels of scaffolding. But eventually, there needs to be some transmission into that student of, I really do want to succeed. I really do learn differently. And I'm willing to go and be resourceful, right? I'm willing to be resourceful. when I had that moment of kind of starting over in my education experience, graduating high school and starting at my community college, I had to make some conscious choices around who I was going to socialize around, what activities I was going to be in. I participated in any proactive bridge program, and I took advantage of every counseling, guiding, transfer resource, career center resource that was available to me. And frankly, I needed it. Like I needed extra help. I needed extra support. I needed like the honors counselor checking like the matriculation work of the transfer counselor, and it was all like triple verified by the regular academic counselor. And so I think knowing what the resources are, normalizing, celebrating, and having a personal commitment to using them is the first piece. Yeah.